Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, thank you for joining me on the record.
It was an absolute pleasure. No, thank you for inviting me.
First question has to be, U.S. President Donald Trump says he's suing the BBC. In your mind, is this a case that has legs?
Well, I'm not an expert on the Florida defamation legal system and the precedents, though everything I read about it is that as a legal case it's very weak. As a political case, the BBC has banked rights. It behaved absolutely appallingly, not just once but twice. So it had done it on Panorama, but it had already done it on Newsnight some time before. And it fits in with the BBC's mindset. The reason they did it, and they didn't check, was because they just thought Donald Trump would have said that. The BBC is inherently hostile to Donald Trump because it is part of the British lefty establishment.
Do you think that this is just another nail in the coffin of the BBC? Are we going to see a time when the British taxpayers just say, enough is enough, we're not going to fund this anymore?
Well, that's already happening, that license fee subscriptions are declining. People are less willing to pay. The structure of media is changing. And it seems to me the BBC has been destroyed by the license fee, that it's viewed it as a safety blanket. It's got this set revenue. But if you look at media revenues from, say, 1990 to now, the BBC's revenue is broadly flat in real terms. Sky's revenue, which didn't exist in 1990, has gone from zero into the tens of billions. Netflix didn't exist until the 2000s, has gone from, 0 to 30 billion or something. And the BBC, because it's had this security of a license fee, has lost its areas of excellence. So in 1990, it was the best at sport, the best at drama, and the best at news. Sky took sport, Netflix has taken drama, it's just got news, but news doesn't make any money, it loses money.
Yeah.
Everyone else who runs news does it as a byproduct of all the rest that they do.
It's a trophy asset.
It's a trophy asset.
Yeah.
And so the BBC, by relying on taxpayer funding, has failed to innovate, failed to use the iPlayer properly. The iPlayer could have been a phenomenal source of revenue, but it felt it should churn everything out for free. It doesn't take adverts on its website, which is a pretty good news source, because it's got the security of the license fee. So I think that's been destroying it and will continue to destroy it. The BBC ought to say, please can we give up the license fee over a number of years and be properly commercial.
Do you think that when the average Brit watches the BBC, sees these images of Donald Trump, as he said, puts words in my mouth, that this comes as a surprise to them? Or in your mind, are people already pretty set in their views with regards to the U.S. president?
I think the British people have been warming to Donald Trump as he's been president because he's done what he said he would do.
Yeah.
And this is astonishing because we're so used to politicians promising one thing and then doing absolutely zippo. So his ability to stop illegal migration resonates with probably about half, probably more, of the British electorate. So whereas when he was elected, the British wouldn't have voted for him, he wouldn't have wanted either Canada or the UK as the 51st state because it would not have sent many electoral college votes. I think Trump's becoming more and more popular in the UK.
Tell me this. I had the chance to sit down with Lord David Cameron just a few days ago in the UAE, and I asked him specifically about the brain drain of talent, of Brits moving because of tax policies to the UAE. In your mind, is this something that's going to continue?
Oh, yes. I've got lots of young children, some of them are teenagers, and a lot of their friends are looking to go to university abroad and then working abroad. And the most well-connected, the richest in UK society, are very international. The leading public schools have very international clientele. And so it's not strange for British people to think they might go abroad. Actually, if you look back at our imperial history, it hasn't been strange to think of going abroad for a very long time. And the tax policies and the economic drift, doom loop really, in this country, mean that people are thinking of going elsewhere.
We did a poll, an Ipsos poll at the National, and essentially it said to us that when people think about moving back to the UK, the things that are stopping them are obviously the economics, but also safety and security. And isn't it the initial, or at least the real goal of every government, to provide a safe and secure place for people to live? So that says to me that this government is failing.
Well, I think this government is failing. I didn't realise this government would be as bad as it is. I didn't think it would be a government that I would love, but I thought the government that I supported had not done well, deserved to lose the election last year, and that Keir Starmer would be dull but competent. He's turned out to be dull but incompetent, which is very unfortunate.
How tough is it going to be to turn this around?
The great thing to remember is that the worse it is, the better it is. Why this paradox? Electorates don't like difficult decisions being made when everything's going well. When the country's rich, it's very mean to cut welfare to poor people who you may think are playing the system, but it's tiny in the scheme of things. All our lunatic green policies that are ruining the country, and really one of the biggest reasons the UK economy has done so badly in the last quarter century, they're fine when you're feeling rich. When times are tough, when the economy isn't working, when tax revenues aren't coming in to meet expenditure, when public services are failing, that's when people accept the radical measures that you need to make things better. This is why Margaret Thatcher could work in 1979. It's crucial to remember all government is by consent, and you only get consent to do difficult things when times are tough. So I am very pessimistic about the next 3 years and then wildly optimistic about what comes next, because there will be an opportunity to do the conservative things in the way Margaret Thatcher did that transformed the country for 50 years, not just for 2 or 3 years.
But don't you need a Thatcher character to do that?
Yes, indeed.
Is that Nigel Farage?
I've got a lot of time for Nigel. I think he's an enormously capable politician. He has the great skill of having his finger on the pulse of British public opinion. But is it Nigel? I'm not sure that his economic policy stands up to much scrutiny. But he's got 3 years and he will no doubt build. And actually, Kemi Badenoch is doing very well at the moment, very good Commons performances. And with some of her shadow cabinet, Andrew Griffith comes to mind, thinking through what economic policy should be. Because immigration is crucial, security is crucial, but above all of that is the economy. Because if you've got a strong economy, you can afford to patrol your borders, you can afford proper defence, you can afford the police. So the economy becomes everything.
In your mind, could this government or the next Conservative government potentially have ever hoped to be tough on migration if Donald Trump hadn't done what he did in the United States? Because he really did open that door.
But the great thing that Donald Trump did is he showed that it's possible. So you have always a lot of hand-wringing by people saying, oh, we can't do that, it's too difficult, there's this problem and that problem, the channel's too short, and so on and so forth. Donald Trump's done it with a land border. If you can do it with a land border, you can do it with a sea border. And so he's shown that it can be done. He's also shown that you have to be pretty ruthless. I do wonder whether the British electorate would cope with sending people to El Salvador.
With ICE raids.
Yeah, but that's what you've got to do if you want to deal with the problem. You've got to be absolutely ruthless about it. And Trump has shown it's possible, and therefore it is now a choice. Whereas I think there was an effort to try and persuade people that there wasn't really a choice. We just had to suck it up.
Suck it up. Tell me this. Is there a way for this country to cut welfare benefits? To her credit, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, did try, and her own party pulled the rug out from under her. Her own prime minister pulled the rug out from under her. So in your mind, you know, how you were talking about, can the British public stomach something? Are they going to be able to stomach welfare cuts?
Well, tried and failed are the harshest thoughts, aren't they, about anybody, poor old Rachel Reeves. I think the country is ready for cuts in welfare. It's fascinating that polling on the 2-child cap is very strongly in favour of the cap.
Yes.
That there are an awful lot of people in this country who aren't enormously well off, who have seen their tax thresholds frozen, so are getting slightly worse off every year, have seen their bills rise, who see their next door neighbour who makes no effort to get a job being paid for by their hard work.
Which is extraordinary.
Which is extraordinary. So I think there is popular support for reducing the welfare budget. And I think you can do it in a number of ways. It's very hard to take money away from people who have already got it. So what can you do? With disability benefits, you do what was done in 2010, and you just check everybody to make sure that they are entitled to have it with face-to-face checks. And when that was done, they found a significant proportion of people simply didn't turn up for the checks because they knew they wouldn't get them. So you get a saving from that. I think you should also freeze welfare benefits as long as tax thresholds are frozen. because it seems very unfair to me that people who are working are being made worse off, whilst those who are not working maintain the same standard of living. And then the third thing you can do is withdraw benefits for new applicants. As I say, it's very hard to take it away from people
once they have it
and have become dependent upon it,
yes,
and whose life revolves around it. But you can say, if you are a new applicant, we won't actually provide you with housing benefit to live in central London. You're going to have to move somewhere cheaper. And I think all of that can be done and needs to be done.
Do you anticipate the Brits that have left the UK en masse, given the tax policies of the current government, will return?
Well, this is a really important question. How do you encourage them to return? You need tax changes. You need, in my view, to restore non-dom status to where it was when Gordon Brown was Prime Minister, which was a very successful approach. And non-dom status exists from about the time of William Pitt, so it's been going successfully for over 200 years before people start fiddling with it. However, if you were a non-dom thinking of coming back to the UK, wouldn't you want some certainty that it wouldn't change and you'd have to leave again after a couple of years? So what I would suggest is that you offer something like a bond, a gilt-edged security, to people who come back, for which you may charge something, to say, if you buy this bond, your tax system will not change for 10 years, and that would give people confidence in coming back. I think you also need to deal with death duties. I think indeed they should be abolished, because it's a very inefficient tax, it collects very small amounts of money, but it's utterly distortive in the allocation of capital. People allocate capital to deal with death duties, not to deal with the best return that they could get, and that needs to be changed.
The middle class in this country, it seems as if the current government is out to get them.
Well, this is socialism, isn't it? The bourgeoisie are in the...
And in light of that, I mean, the UAE seems like quite a fantastic proposition.
Well, it has low taxes, it has a comfortable lifestyle, it has probably too much sunshine.
Can you have too much?
Yes, I think you can.
We're in England.
So yes, of course. And people want to do well for themselves and for their families. They want to make a go of it, and they have a better chance of making a go of it currently in the UAE than they do in the UK.
So major economies in Western Europe, France, Germany, they're essentially broke.
Yes.
Is it concerning to you that they're going to pull the United Kingdom into a war with Vladimir Putin? Because that's the note that I'm hearing sounded, particularly with regards to the military, Merz, Macron, they're all sounding the drums of war. Is that something you worry about?
Well, they better be careful about this, because they don't have the capacity to do anything about it, because they haven't spent any money on it for a very long time.
And Donald Trump is not going to pay for it.
Is not going to pay for it.
So what is that all about in your mind? Chest beating?
France and Germany must take a lot of responsibility for what is going on in Ukraine at the moment, because of the Minsk agreements, which gave in to Putin, and gave in to Putin because Germany was dependent on Russian gas. It was sort of bought by Russia, and some very senior German politicians made a lot of money out of Russian gas. It's worth bearing that in mind. So Germany and France are culpable for getting us to where we are. There's then, how do you get out of this situation? And you have to follow through with one absolute principle of international affairs, and that is invading sovereign territory is wrong. As with the first Iraq war, the US and the UK were absolutely right to go to the defense of Kuwait, and I imagine most of your viewers would share that view. If you give up on sovereign borders, then you have broken down the whole basis of international law. And this is what Donald Trump is saying in his latest strategy document. He says the building block is the nation state, with which I completely agree. If you're a believer in nation states, you have to protect their borders. So it is in the interests of the UK, Germany, France, and indeed the United States to secure a border in Ukraine. It is unlikely that that border will be the border it was in 2014. That is a sad reality. But I think going to war with Russia would not be in anybody's interests, not Russian interests, and not the interests of Russia's neighbours.
Tell me this. I was speaking to the Russian ambassador to the United Kingdom just a few weeks ago, and of course this idea of the frozen Russian funds being used to rebuild Ukraine did come up, and of course they have a very strong Russian response to this. Is that something that worries you in terms of the legalities? Because they're really pushing Brussels, they're pushing Belgium to get on board with this. And it could end up being very bad for them down the line.
I'm very cautious about it. I can't remember whether it was Latvia or Lithuania, but one of them deposited their gold with the United Kingdom before the Second World War. In the 1960s, when Harold Wilson was Prime Minister, we gave that gold to the Soviet Union. When they then became independent again, the British taxpayer had to find that gold to replace it.
Yes.
You've got to deal with these sorts of things in the very long term. At some point in the future, there will be peace with Russia. Look back at our relationship with Russia over the last 200 years, and we've had periods of hostility, we've had the Crimean War, and we've had periods of engagement and peace. There will be a period of peace.
Yes.
At which point, the condition for that peace will be that we pay back the money. And that will fall on the taxpayers who have taken the money in the first place. It won't fall on Ukraine, because they won't have any money to pay.
Yes.
And it will be a key demand of an ultimate normalisation. So I see absolutely why in the short term it is attractive, but any government that takes that money should put it on its balance sheet as a contingent liability.
Yes.
Because I think at some point it will be paid back. So no, I wouldn't take Russian money. I would keep it frozen. I would make every possible sanction against Russia whilst it is in Ukraine as tough as you possibly could. I would make it difficult for people close to the Russian regime to travel, all those sorts of things. But I think once you start taking money that belongs to somebody else without...
It's just fiscally irresponsible.
Well, it's fiscally irresponsible, and there's no legal sanction for it, nor can there be, because there is no court that can demand its confiscation.
But what does it say to you that the key negotiators or key sort of touch points in these talks have not, between the United States and Russia and Ukraine, have been in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates? What does it say to you about where we are with international diplomacy?
Well, I mean, the position of Saudi Arabia is extremely interesting and important. It's an ally of the UK and a very important ally of the UK and indeed of the US, but also it has maintained a friendly neutrality towards Russia. Obviously, they have very shared interests in relation to oil and gas. And I think it is sort of become the new Switzerland, in a sense, and is managing to straddle these difficult differences of opinion. And you always need countries like that. You always need the states that can bring people together, because whenever there is a war of any kind, everyone says we will never talk. Must win, it must be a military victory. And they're always talking behind the scenes at the same point, one way or another. There are always lines, channels being kept open, and you need the places for those channels to be kept open that can, if necessary, be denied and rolled back from. Yeah.
Do you think in those conversations that are being had with Vladimir Putin, having covered Russia and covered Ukraine for the last 2 decades, to my mind, there's no reason for him to come to the negotiating table at this point, because he loses sort of his status of being able to get the President of the United States on the phone. Then he becomes sort of a fifth-rate dictator of a fifth-rate economy.
That's the problem for Russia.
With nukes, but still.
Yeah, with nukes, that's right. There's a great lesson from all of this, is that Ukraine should never have given up its nuclear weapons.
You got it.
And you should never trust guarantees from a Russian government. But other than that...
Or guarantees from the West, because we convinced them to do it.
Indeed, yes. You shouldn't trust other countries. Countries always act in their own interests in the end. But if you've got nuclear weapons, keep them. Look at North Korea.
Yeah.
North Korea is of importance and significance because it's got a nuclear bomb. Otherwise, it is a tin pot little place run by a fat little man with a very bad haircut. I hope he's watching.
Don't know if our viewership reaches to North Korea, but I can ask.
I'm sure it does. But you're absolutely right. Russia is nothing on the world stage without this. It's why America, as far as I can tell, is saying to Europe, for heaven's sake, pull yourself together. There is this relatively small economy that has been run badly, that has been suffering because of sanctions, and you're unable to do anything about it, even though your combined economy is 10 times the size. What are you thinking about? Yeah. Why are you relying on us?
You look at a country like the UAE, look at Saudi Arabia, look at Qatar, what they're trying to do today. In terms of moving away from just having a fossil fuel-based economy. They're quite successful so far in doing that in a relatively short amount of time. They're able to move quickly. how do you see this geopolitically going forward? Because these countries, they're interlocutors between the West and other actors like China, like Russia. Is the sort of center of things, the gravity of things, moving eastward?
Well, I think it obviously is moving eastward because of China and India, as well as what's going on in the Middle East. You raise a really interesting question about how democracies can operate when dictatorships can be so much swifter. And I think the fascinating comparison is between China and India. Before I got fully involved in politics, I was an emerging markets investor, so I spent a lot of time looking at China and India. And India is very much the tortoise to the hare, but I think India will be the one that succeeds.
Because of population?
Not because of population, though the population control in China, which was always a wicked policy, has been a disaster. No, but because of the stability that democracy brings, so that although the changes in India have been slower, and some things have been painfully slow, and I remember visiting Bombay and going into the airport, and they'd had some great plan to remove a shanty town that was stopping the airport expanding, and the shanty town was duly moved after years and years and years of legal battles, and it moved to another part of the airport. So India's been very slow, though Modi has sped things up quite a bit, because it's a democracy. But because it's a democracy, it has the rights of property, very strongly so. It has a proper legal system, it has the rule of law, and it has freedom of speech, which allows people to highlight things that go wrong, and democracy underpinning all of that. And therefore the reforms in India are very solidly based. Whereas in China, you're always waiting with bated breath to find out who the next dictator will be. And will the next dictator be Deng Xiaoping, or will it be Chairman Mao? And if it's Chairman Mao, it's all over again. And so I do have confidence in the democratic model, and this is going to be true in the Middle Eastern states as well, that some of them have been blessed, particularly the UAE, with very benign rulers who have understood how to make things work. And Saudi Arabia's development is also very remarkable, but that's been dependent on the Crown Prince, hasn't it? On his individual approach. And you never know with monarchies, and I'm a strong monarchist, who the next monarch will be. And if you look at the history of monarchies, they can run into terrible difficulties when the next monarch turns out not to be as good as his father.
Taiwan. There's been a lot of conversation, particularly in the last few years, about whether the United States would move to save Taiwan. In your mind, if the West were to walk away from Taiwan, is this a judgment on democratic values?
Well, to go back to my investment management career, I used to run a Taiwan fund investing exclusively in Taiwan stocks. And I think Taiwan is one of the most remarkable countries in the world. But this is a bit I think hasn't been picked up in the latest strategy document. It's the clearest exposition of America's support for Taiwan that I have ever read. It says in no uncertain terms that it wants the status quo to be maintained, that this is a fundamental American interest, and it's part of the reason for moving away from Europe, that China is identified as the problem rather than Russia, and Taiwan is a key component of that. So I think it would be a catastrophe for the West if Taiwan went. And I think what you see going on has a unity within it. So you see Gaza, you see Ukraine, and you see Taiwan. We have two proxy wars that the West is fighting. In Gaza, thanks to Israel, in Ukraine, thanks to the Ukrainians. Israel seems to have managed to at least hold its own. Ukraine is still in great difficulties. This indicates weakness of the West, that we have not been able to win both of those straightforwardly, which obviously presents an opportunity to China. And therefore I think Trump's clarity to China that this is a fundamental Western interest, US interest, is very good news. But I agree with what underpinned your question. If we were to walk away from Taiwan, that would be a collapse of things that the West believes in and an utter victory for a communist totalitarian regime.
2026 predictions. What are you looking forward to?
I think we will have a new Prime Minister in the UK by the end of 2026 and a new Chancellor of the Exchequer. I would be, I'd love to see peace in Ukraine, but it's not guaranteed. If there is peace in Ukraine, and this will be very important to a lot of your viewers, the oil price goes down. It's already started falling in anticipation. And I think the green argument completely collapses.
Yes.
Because it was all predicated on renewables being very cheap and oil being very expensive. Oil is going to be very cheap. Gas is going to be given away. I mean, the LNG ships will be desperate to give away their gas because Russia at some point will come back on, at which point Europe is overwhelmed with gas. And yes, I know there'll be supply difficulties and so on, but actually pipelines and things get restored much faster than you anticipate after an event of this kind. They always do.
And you anticipate Europe will buy Russian gas again?
Once there's a settlement, of course they will. They already are. They're just pretending not to.
And in your mind, will 2026 be a good year for Donald Trump?
Well, he's got midterm elections. Midterm elections are very rarely good for incumbent presidents. And so I think it might be a slightly difficult year for him. He loses the impetus of the first excitement of office.
Yes.
Some of the policies that he's introduced take time to bed down. Some of the policies that he's followed that I don't think are so sensible. I'm not in favour of tariffs. I'm a great believer in free trade. Will have economic consequences for Americans that they won't like. The price of some of their goods will go up. So I think 2026 will be a trying year for the US president.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, thank you for joining me on The Record.
Thank you for joining me.